Welcome to this explainer. Look, when most of us hear the word science, we instantly picture test tubes, right? Maybe particle accelerators or people in white lab coats measuring the physical world out there. But what about the world in here? Well, long before fMRI machines were even a blip on the radar, ancient Indian traditions were turning that exact same scientific rigor inward. They literally created a highly systematic science of subjectivity. Let's get right into it.
So modern science generally observes reality from the outside looking in. It hooks up a brain, it measures electrical impulses. But these ancient Indian traditions, they kicked things off with a radically different but totally fundamental first-person question. What is it actually like to experience reality? What is the actual nature of the awareness where all our everyday experiences just happen? They weren't just throwing out wild guesses here. They were determined to map the observer.
And you can really see the difference in how they went about this. On one side, you've got objective science, relying on third-person observation, looking at things from the outside. On the flip side, contemplative investigation relies entirely on first-person experience, and this is a massive distinction to keep in mind. For these traditions, meditation wasn't just some sort of religious ritual. No, it was a disciplined, highly systematic method for investigating experience from the inside out, completely backed up by fierce logical analysis and philosophical inquiry.
All right, part 1. The science of subjectivity, where we investigate the first-person experience.
To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to take a progressive journey through 5 distinct philosophical lenses. We've got Buddhist Epistemology, Yogacara, Advaita Vedanta, Madhyamaka, and finally, Kashmiri Shaivism. Now, don't think of these as just dry historical stepping stones. Each one is a unique lens that actively peels back a different layer of exactly how your mind constructs the reality you are experiencing at this very second.
Moving on to part 2, layers of the mind, going from raw experience to constructed reality.
Okay, consider the concept of pratyaksha. Just think about this for a second. If you accidentally touch a hot stove, there's this split second of raw, immediate shock before your brain even has time to formulate the word hot or danger. That raw, non-conceptual encounter, that is pratyaksha. It highlights a really profound principle. Seeing actually happens before naming. The experience comes before the theory. So if we want to understand consciousness, we have to look at experience as it's actually lived, right before the mind jumps in and slaps a convenient label on it. Because the reality is, literally a millisecond after that direct perception, our minds go into overdrive. Our everyday reality gets instantly filtered through these deep, ingrained conceptual layers. We're talking memory, language, expectations, emotion, and our conceptual categories. They all completely color what we perceive. The world we walk around in every day, it is absolutely not a passive, objective copy of reality. It is highly edited and interpreted by our own mental conditioning. Let's take this a step deeper. The Yogacara tradition takes this whole filtering process and dials it up to 11. Ordinarily, we walk around thinking, okay, I am in here and the world is out there. But Yogacara asks, is that division really as solid as it feels? They propose that our experience of a self and a world is profoundly shaped by what they call our storehouse consciousness, basically all our habitual tendencies and latent dispositions. It perfectly explains why two people can walk into the exact same room, face the exact same situation, and walk away having experienced two completely different realities. In a very real sense, the human world is constructed through consciousness. Which brings us to part 3. Who is the observer? Finding the witnessing ground. So here's the absolute crux of the matter. If our thoughts are constantly changing, our emotions are shifting, our bodily sensations are fluctuating, heck, even our sense of personal identity evolves over the course of a lifetime, who or what is exactly watching all of this change? Well, Advaita Vedanta approaches this by shifting the focus entirely. Instead of getting caught up in the changing contents of consciousness, it looks directly at consciousness itself. Their answer is Atman, the witnessing consciousness. It's not just another object you can look at. It's the fundamental, unchanging ground that makes any experience possible in the first place. This leads right into a frankly brilliant contemplative practice of discrimination. It's essentially a process of elimination where you come to realize, I am not merely the body. I am not merely sensations. I am not thoughts. I am not emotions. I am the awareness in which all of these appear. It's beautifully designed to strip away absolutely everything that changes, leaving you to recognize the ultimate witnessing reality. For them, liberation isn't about gaining some brand new mystical superpower or knowledge. It's simply about recognizing the awareness that has literally been there the entire time. But hold on, because the philosophical debate definitely doesn't stop there. Enter Madhyamaka Buddhism. famously associated with the philosopher Nagarjuna. Madhyamaka steps up and actively challenges the idea of any permanent unchanging ground. They systematically argue that if you look closely enough at reality, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, not the subject doing the looking nor the object being looked at, actually possesses an independent, isolated essence. And that brings us to the famous concept of shunyata, or emptiness. Now we've got to be careful here. Emptiness does not mean nothing exists, not at all. It just means that phenomena lack intrinsic existence, what they call svabhava. Everything arises dependently. The subject only exists in relation to objects, to memory, to language, to the body. And objects only make sense through perception and cognition. They brilliantly avoid the extreme of an absolute solid substance, and they avoid the extreme of total non-existence. They argue that sure, conventional reality functions perfectly well, but it completely depends on this massive web of interconnected conditions. On to part 4, Beyond Subject and Object, looking at the unified expression of consciousness. So if the subject and the object aren't completely independent, how do they actually relate to one another in the grand scheme of things? Well, Kashmiri Shaivism steps in with this radically affirmative vision, where some of the other traditions might emphasize the emptiness of the world or trying to transcend objects entirely. Kashmiri Shaivism says, hey, the multiplicity of the universe, every perception, every thought, emotion, and natural phenomenon, none of that is an error or an illusion you need to escape. Instead, they see subject and object as differentiated, creative expressions of one deeper, unified, universal consciousness. It's wild. Diversity is actually celebrated as the meaningful, dynamic self-expression of the one. So, just to quickly summarize this amazing progressive exploration we've been on, Buddhist epistemology separates direct experience from our concepts. Yogacara shows us how consciousness actively constructs reality. Advaita isolates that unchanging witnessing awareness. Madhyamaka reveals the dependent, empty nature of our fixed identities. And finally, Kashmiri Shaivism wraps the whole shebang up by viewing everything as a unified expression of consciousness. Sure, they might disagree on some fundamental metaphysics, but together they form this incredibly rich philosophical laboratory of the human mind.
And that brings us to our final section, Integrating Science and Experience, Building an Integral Philosophy.
So how does this ancient inner laboratory actually connect with our very modern objective world? Look, modern science is absolutely phenomenal at third-person observation. Physics can perfectly describe how light travels across the universe. Neuroscience can map the exact neural correlates firing in your brain when you feel love. But here's the thing. Those descriptions do not exhaust the lived human experience. It is human consciousness that actually experiences the breathtaking beauty of a sunset. It is consciousness that feels the intimacy, the devotion, and the vulnerability of love. Subjective experience doesn't disprove science, and science doesn't invalidate contemplation. They're really just different modes of access to different dimensions of reality. And here is exactly why understanding this is absolutely crucial. Subjectivity isn't just some private, isolated interior world where you sit alone with your thoughts. It is literally the origin point of our entire objective civilization. Think about it. A scientific hypothesis exists as a subjective idea in a scientist's mind long before it becomes a physical experiment in a lab. A constitution starts as an internal concept of justice before it's ever a binding legal document. Every piece of art, every political institution, every major technological advancement, they all begin as a subjective idea before acquiring any sort of independent, objective existence out there in the world. This is why we desperately need a comprehensive framework that integrates all aspects of reality. We can't just reduce consciousness entirely to matter, but we also can't reject the incredible discoveries of science for pure spiritual speculation. We really need all three domains. We need third-person science to explain objective structures. We need first-person contemplation to investigate our lived experience. And we need shared human meaning through things like art, myth, and imagination to explore significance. Our reality is simply too rich, too complex, for any single mode of knowing to capture the whole picture. The ultimate task here isn't about forcing yourself to choose between the objective world and your subjective experience. It's about developing an understanding that's actually capable of holding both. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. When you look at your own life, how do you balance the hard, measurable facts of the outside world with the undeniable, vivid reality of your inner experience? How do you integrate these different lenses in your own understanding of reality? Take that question with you and keep exploring.